My name is Bill Masulis, for those of you who don't know me, and I am the curator or the co-curator of these series of screenings. They're called Unknown Pleasures, and Chris Luscri is the other curator, and this is actually his kind of programming tonight. He really wanted to put this film on. I wanted to put it on too, of course, but apologies he's not here. He's really sorry he's not here, but he had to go to Sydney today for a particular project which could only be done today. So yeah, thanks for coming everyone, and thanks to the cinema for allowing us to screen these kind of films. Good on you, Josh and team. And thank you also to the traditional owners of this land who allow us to live, work and play here after 250 years of abuse against them. My respects to the Wurundjeri elders, and my love and solidarity with all Indigenous people. I'm just going to, we're going to have a really great Q&A at the end, so I'm not going to invite the director up or anyone else. We'll leave it till the end. This film is really special, and it's a high-def restored print, which is really fantastic, which I haven't seen myself yet. And it's called Queensland, as you know, directed by John Ruane. His first film is a student film, starring John Flaus, who then, it was his first acting role, playing a character, and he then went on to have an amazing career as an actor for lots of films, and always for student films as well. And the Q&A will be moderated by Jack Wilson, from The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, and who's actually a very fine critic who really loves Australian independent film. So I don't think I've forgotten anything, and so I think we'll just get the film going. And the film's just about 50 odd minutes, and then in the end we won't rush the Q&A. It might go for a little while, because I think it is a special Q&A for John Flaus in particular, as he's getting on a bit, old crusty, and he's got Alzheimer's, as he admits openly. So we will get a lot out of you, John, tonight. So yeah, thanks everyone again for coming, and we'll speak afterwards. Okay.
That was torture to suffer through it 48 years later.
So, beautiful. Yeah, just introducing everyone. I suppose they don't need any introductions from right. John Ruane and Jake Wilson and John Flaus.
Well, I think it's a beautiful film, and I think it's got one of the great endings in Australian movies.
I'll give you that. I think the last shot is a great shot, and I think we did that 3 or 4 times.
Just
and then,
grab on.
And then the last take, a miracle. The train came. Every time we knew what time the train was supposed to come through the station, and then it wouldn't turn up. We'd start the shot, and it wouldn't turn up. And on the last take, the train came, but the guy came out with the car at the perfect time. Someone walked down the street at the perfect time. It was like I can't believe it. It was like, and then the car, then the train, it was just unbelievable. And it was in focus. And that crane, sorry John, I'm hogging it just for a second.
No, go on, mate.
But we wanted, that shot was inspired by an Arthur Penn film called Mickey 1 with Warren Beatty in it. I don't know if you ever saw it. And in the end, Warren Beatty walks from this nightclub, and it's a shot like that. So we were just going to shoot it up here in High Street on the down here, just up in the Palace Cinema. Not as good a cinema as this, but where you look down, and then he said, "I wonder if we could get a crane." And I said, "We haven't got any money," but there was someone we did on the way driving home. There was a Claude Neon crane doing something. We asked the guy what it would cost to hire him for 2 hours the next day, and it wasn't much. And then we asked the Northcote City Council, would they wet the street down? And the guy came out with the truck, with the water truck, and said, for a slab of beer, I'll do it. So we gave him a slab of beer and he wet down the street for us. So, yeah. And John was very good with the poetic stopping of the car and starting at the car. It was like a piece of ballet, really.
I was watching it thinking, how did you make all those things happen at the right moment? John, watching the film, what were your thoughts?
Looking at it now,
Yeah.
oh, that there's just not been sufficient realism in Australian film drama. And one of the curious things, because this hadn't got through to me before, was that the early credit says film noir production, but I can't think of anything less like film noir than what we see in this picture. And that everything we see is of interest, it's got some meaning, whereas in most films, much of what we look at on screen at any one time is something that's simply there for the moment to not to occupy our attention. And yet here in this detail of all kind, what we were wearing and what was around us and however we moved, all of that was part of a reality. And what I found myself doing, which is curious when I'm looking at my own performance, is what I think of as being impressionistic drama. You know, expressionistic drama is what most of us think of in both in theatre and in film, where the emotion is generated by the characters, the situation they're in, how they relate to each other, and that the emotion then, the flow of emotion in the time of a screening is from the performers to the audience. But then there are occasions when the reverse flow can take place, whereas whatever emotions are going through the characters, they draw emotion from an audience. The audience are lending their emotion to the characters, and that's what I think of as impressionism. That's rare in Australian film, it's rare in national film overall, but very few of us attempt to do this in Australian films as thoroughly as these two young blokes, John and Ellery. Now, John, my memory of this, given that I've got real problems with my memory these days, is that you blokes showed me a copy of the script at some stage from the time that you'd written it, and I looked at it and I thought, well, gee, I hadn't ever acted as a character before. I'd appeared in 2 films, in each of which I behaved as myself. This was the first time I was being asked by these students who were doing their graduation film now, their production, for me to be there and do some of that work, and if possible, generate a feeling from an audience to give something to the character, that I play the character. And I think that works. And that's rare in Australian film. And here are these 2 young blokes just getting started. They didn't have careers yet, they were about to begin on them. And they made this film. And somehow or other, Australia at large wasn't ready for it. It came too soon, I think, this film.
Well, how did John get in the film? Well, it went to Brian Robertson, who was head of the film school, who was, I see in good light, bad light.
Yeah.
Didn't want the film made because I couldn't understand it, because he didn't want any students making a film longer than 20 minutes. So he said, you can't use the equipment. So we bought a second-hand camera and a second-hand Nagra. I think they allowed us to have 3 redheads and a blonde light from the school. And then we applied to the Experimental Film Fund. Who should turn out to be on the 3-person panel? Brian, Ross Dimsey and John. And I think the only reason we got the film made was obviously John had another motive which I didn't know about, that he was going to star in the film. And we got the money, and afterwards he said, you've got the money, but you don't have to use me, but I did play a big part in getting the money. And I had no idea who to cast or anything, and we asked John to shave his beard off and go to the place across in Bird Road to the opposite Swinburne, and I'd rung Harold Bagent, who was the voice of Mad Max in Mad Max 2, who does the voice of the Road Warrior, sent him the script, and then he suggested Bob Carl, Alison Bird. My father ran a panel beating shop, and one of the assessors used to be an extra in commercials, and my father said, my son's making a film, would you be able to help him out with some extras? So a lot of the people who were in the film were extras that hadn't had a line of dialogue before, and I suppose we rehearsed for a few days, and all the dialogue in the film was on the page. And John was far beyond my expectations. I mean, the actors directed themselves. We did a few days rehearsal, but once we were flat out just getting the film made, and only doing 1 or 2 takes.
I mean, you could say all the dialogue is on the page, but 90% of the film is not in the dialogue. But John, how did you go from not having, as you say, acted but only behaved as yourself to being able to give that performance?
I can't answer that. I still don't know. After all the work that I've done since, I've got 130 odd credits, screen credits, and this, apart from the 2 where I was being myself, this was the beginning of it all. I was aware of one thing, that having read the script, that that bloke was in some ways like my old man, and so I thought, you know, if I'm going to be different from myself, but still I have these feelings, or I've been through most of them, not all of them of course, when you see what happens in that picture, but still that was something I could try. But these were all questions I asked of myself and had never had an answer to. So the unknown, the personal unknown was great, but what these blokes had written was so good, it really was. And when I hear some of that language now, I think, gee whiz, you still couldn't put that out to the public these days without being prosecuted. And yet, what was I doing? I was trying to speak to them, well, in ways which were true for the time, for the person, for the culture. That, to me, is so important. What we have in this film is, I believe, still one of the finest portraits of Australian culture, and yet it's not even feature length yet. That's how much is here in this film.
What I was thinking about watching it is that Doug, as you say, he's not a very open person, to say the least, at least not at the moment we meet him, and yet so we feel there's a whole lot in him which we barely see or don't see except in glimpses. We see glimpses, bits of his past, we see bits of perhaps what his future could be, but he almost doesn't quite exist in the present. So did you have to kind of imagine that whole past for him and so on to get to performance, or did you just have to say the lines in the present?
Oh, we talked about this, John, and look, I can't again give a confident reply because I'm not remembering well enough, and I can't blame Alzheimer's partly for that I can't remember. But no, I no longer know what that was. And I wasn't even acting in that film. I mean, I was acting in it, yes, of course, in that role, but I haven't acted in anything else since with quite that same sense of belonging. I belonged to that character I was playing, who was quite like my father in some ways, and he was a bloke I didn't always get on with, by the way, but nonetheless there was something solid about him, and that what he handled the world, he met the world, he tried to deal with it, even though he did not have great understanding of it. That's my father, and I thought that was the same with this character here, and that he would, what he did understand, that's what he would have to deal with, and whatever it took, his emotion, then it was at risk when he acted, and even sometimes when he spoke. Yeah.
I wonder if both of you could say something about Alison Bird, who has really not very much screen time, but has to give us so much information about, what your character's relationship has been, and who she is, and how she feels about him now, and so on. And to me, she doesn't waste a moment. But
Well, I've had no contact with Alison for, I don't want to count how many years, but half a lifetime. I don't know. I haven't worked with her or anything, nor have I ever met and sat down and have a talk with her. I don't know why she didn't have a longer career, why she wasn't noticed, because what she was doing in that was, again, right on. It wasn't wide and diverse and spreading and all that, but it was right on what was needed. I think she was. I would have thought, looking at that film, going back to an earlier time, of course, in the history of film, that there was a future for that performer.
Exactly.
Mm.
Yeah. And I can't explain why.
I would have thought the same for Bob Carl too.
Oh yes, yeah.
And I've never seen either of them ever appear again. I mean, my knowledge of the film was going to be ending once I passed my exam with that film. I had no expectations of ever really being shown. I was surprised to find when it was eventually sold to the ABC. I couldn't believe that. And they paid 25 grand for it. And then I don't know what Greg Lynch, who sold the film to him, had on someone at the ABC. They had to show it within 3 or 5 years, and they showed it in the last week that they owned the film. And then they showed it unannounced at 10 o'clock one night, and then there was a letter in the Age, or the ABC sent me a letter of protest from the Queensland Tourist Bureau. Yeah.
So they should.
Yeah. I thought one other thing is I was listening to the music, particularly the piece of that music when the crane shot goes. That was by a pianist called Skip Rose, who played in the Tonally Musselwhite Blues Band in Chicago. And I had an old Hooley record, and I thought, I'd better pay the rights for this one. And I looked on the back of the cover, and it had the phone number of the company. So I rang them in Los Angeles, and Chris Stolovitz, who owned the company, it was a one-man company. He said, just a minute, I'm putting the LP covers on now, I'm just sticking them on my kitchen table. And I said, I've made this student film, and I want to use that piece of music by Charlie Musselwhite Blues Band. He said, how much can you pay? I said, it's a student film, I could pay a maximum of $500. He said, that would be what, about 3,000, because he thought he was talking to someone in Austria. So he eventually received a check for, I don't know, about $340 or something, but we got the world rights to that piece of music.
John, I wonder if you could pick up a bit on what John was saying about details, because I think he's right. I think the film's all details. It's details of how people act in the costumes, the locations, the turns of phrase. Were there particular details for you that felt like that maybe they kind of anchored the film, that were especially important to get right?
Watching it again now, I did think a bit at the time of Mice and Men, with those two characters, and I told the story to someone else. We had an uncle in the family who was a bit of a black sheep who used to turn up at our house drunk, and I never knew what had happened to him to make him that way. But my father always came out. My father had been an ex-boxer and had a go at him, and then they'd ring the police and the police would take him away. So he was a returned serviceman, and he always used to wear an army coat like that. So I thought I should put Orb in that army coat, because that was the kind of character. And the big influence on the film was in the John Huston film called Fat City, with Jeff Bridges, and obviously Stacey Keach is a broken down boxer, and a Canadian film by Donald Shibu called Going Down the Road, which was about a couple of people from country Canada who travelled up to Ontario to get a job. So it was, and the other thing was some of the 17th doll, but like in reverse. But it was sparked, of all things, it's such a weird thing. I read in the Herald, the age must have been above me by then, at that stage, that a slaughterman had killed his de facto wife and then slept with her for 3 days. And I thought, wow, how did that happen? And I don't know how, but that fed in, and all the other things fed into us just writing the script. And I had been taken by another uncle to the greyhounds, and my other uncle had greyhounds, which always lost. So I suppose some of those things just fed into it.
Perhaps you could both comment on this. I think you wrote in a piece about John for Senses of Cinema that he had an influence on the style, and he encouraged you in particular to use more wide shots.
That's true. Well, the film stock was so expensive then that, John kept saying, don't do any close-ups, and I thought, well, that'd be great, because we only ever have the students. We never really did a full day. I only had the students for half a day, and then they might come back again. We might get them for another half day. So it took a few half days over 3 weeks to shoot it. So I ended up doing a lot of that, just a wide shot and a master, because we didn't have time, and just to get the scene done at the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add one also about the film, going back to the earlier statement about the sort of the values, the spiritual quality that is there, regardless of what specific representations it's given, what they stand for. That if I were to give a simple one-sentence summary of what goes on in this film, what occurs in this film, I would describe these two middle-aged blokes who are sort of had no real success in life, and now they're at night, they're sort of wandering around, and they're talking. They've at last got something to do, and they're talking about it, to go to Queensland, and it's a beautiful place, Queensland, and some years after this, a bloke in Ireland by the name of Beckett wrote Waiting for Godot, and that's about a couple of blokes knocking around at dark, talking about where they're going, what's going to happen in the future. And there is, for me, an affinity between these two, even though it's not as though one of them were a sequel to the other. They came entirely different from different sources. And I don't think that Samuel Beckett's ever seen your film, John.
I do remember seeing you on stage, not doing Waiting for Godot, but doing Crap's Last Tape at La Mama many years later.
Yeah.
And it did seem like that play, and you fit together.
Well, Crap's Last Tape.
He did Waiting for Godot as well.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Yeah, I did do it. Yeah. But I've got John and Ellery to thank, because they chose me for the film. They took a chance on me, as I was taking a chance on myself, and it clicked.
I've got, I think, one more question for John, and then I'm going to throw it open to the audience. And my last question is there a particular scene or a moment that you can remember where what you had written and what John brought to it kind of, seemed surprising to you, where you thought this has kind of gone to something which you didn't anticipate?
Probably happens all the time. Yeah, whenever you write something, obviously if you say the dialogue yourself and you play all the characters yourself, and then if someone comes into an audition and actually plays it like you hear it in your head, then that's the person you want. But then when you hear a human voice actually contact the words for the first time and they come to life, that actor always brings a lot more to it than you ever thought possible, because they fill it out and it becomes not two-dimensional, it becomes a three-dimensional performance. And then in the audition, in the rehearsals, things change, not so much in the dialogue in this, but any other film I've done, the dialogue changes, because actors say, I don't need 5 lines, I can do it with 1 line and a look. So actors always enrich the whole thing. Yeah. And I mean, what had been my training at Swinburne for acting? Nothing. A lady called Louise Alice, well, I can't remember her surname, came in and we were bits of melting chocolate and having to be stuck on a wall and pretending. But there was never any teaching of what performance was, except for that. So I only found out about by doing it and hoping that people said it in my performed what I heard in my head.
All right, well, I might throw it open to any of you. I'm sure there's questions out there. Yes, far right.
Well, we certainly did get some distribution. I know that I projected the film. Question at the end on the filmmaker's cover.
Yes.
I wanted to ask about what I think is a scene that I've never seen anything quite like in any other film, and that's right in the middle, where Doug is narrating to Marge all of his hopes, and you've got a line there facing the camera, commentating on what he says with her face.
Yes.
I've never seen anyone else do that, not quite that way.
Yeah, well, there were a number of reasons to do that because we only had a very short period of time to shoot it, and John said he could do it in one take, and Alison said she could do it, and she thought maybe she could work her way towards a tear towards the end, and I think maybe we did it twice, and that was it. There wasn't really any time to do any close-ups or anything else, and I just thought it kind of just worked in the one shot.
Was that?
She is remarkable, really, in that shot, in that scene.
Was that conception of the scene blocking yours, Ellery's?
The blocking of that scene?
Yeah.
What, you mean like the composition?
Yes.
I suppose it was a bit of both of us.
Yeah.
I mean, I already had a much better eye for cinematography and became a cinematographer than I did. I was always happy to take anybody else's ideas.
And that's a great scene, isn't it, that one? It is a great scene. In international cinema, I see that as one of the great scenes.
In the middle at back.
I was wondering if anyone's charted the kind of history of Australian social realist cinema. You know, I'm thinking like of this film and Brian McKenzie's films, you know, like The Lofty Person Next to Me. This kind of, you know, really captures this really intimate feeling of the city, particularly Melbourne at that time. Where does this film, do you think, fit in, like say, with 1970s Australian cinema? Was anyone else making this kind of thing?
Yeah, there was Nigel Bruce made a film called Come Out Fighting, which was about an Aboriginal boxer who was torn between black activists and his white trainer. And it's a great film. It's a 50-minute film. It was a big influence. He made it a year or 2 years before Queensland. He was our lecturer. I don't remember Nigel teaching us anything, but just seeing that film was all he needed to do to actually convey information, because it had a very similar style to this film.
What about the short film called Georgian Needles?
Georgian Needles, fantastic film by Greg Deep.
That was made at the same time, or a couple of years?
A couple of years before, yeah.
It's a short film, and it's two guys who are these kind of rough kind of guys. It's about mateship, and they get drunk a lot too, and yeah.
They were real characters, though. They were. I don't know how much acting was involved in that.
John, are there other Australian films that come to mind when you hear social realism?
No, they don't come to mind, I'm sorry to say, but that's, again, I've just blown my, what do you call it, see, again, I forgot Alzheimer's. No, because of course there are other films, Australian films, where that social realism is the principle But no, unless again my memory has failed me, and unfortunately it does now sometimes.
Mouth to Mouth was another one. Mouth to Mouth?
Yes, Mouth to Mouth is John Digan, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's Love Letters from Trafalgar Road is
Stephen Wallace, yeah. That's what I thought of.
That's like a 50-minute film.
Yeah.
Again, about like a relationship between a man and a woman. That's got some echoes with your film.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe the year
Yes.
after. Yeah.
The year after, yes.
I'd have to say too, I mean, that film was made with a budget. Our film was a student film.
Yes.
Was it possible though to get 50-minute films into cinemas? Like when you were making it, did you think, yes, we can get this onto a screen?
No, I had no vision of it being projected because it was, and I didn't know how long it was going to be. The script was only 26 pages, but it ended up being a 50-minute film because, as you said, there's visuals between the dialogue. So it got longer, much longer than I thought it was going to be. No, I had... It was screened once at a cinema in the city for a couple of weeks, and as a support to something, and I think it did a few film festivals overseas.
Mm.
And the Melbourne Filmmakers Co-op, the Penny
Melbourne
mentioned.
Filmmakers Co-op, it certainly did, screened there for a couple of weeks. Yeah.
Can I just ask, I'm just curious, you know, watching this film, it reminds me a bit of Wake and Fright. Just in bits. I mean, obviously, it's really interesting to kind of see, you know, the drinking and the smoking. It's something we just don't. It's gone. You know, those old timers in the pub. It's fantastic. I mean, it's a piece of history.
The guy
there,
who drinks
fine.
the jug. Yeah.
The jug, the beer, yeah. He was an extra, and he said to me, that wasn't in the script. He said, "John, you know I can drink a jug of beer." I said, "What?" He said, "I can drink a jug of beer, like without being, and I won't vomit." So I said, "Oh, that'd be great. Why don't we do that?" And because it was a hotel, Rising Sun in Carlton, and I remember saying, because all those people were the people from the pub, I said, "There's free beer for every time we're here," so they will all turn up. And then I think we shot that on the first day, so it was kind of, they then would tolerate us after that because we were amusing.
If I could just ask a question building on that, when you made the film, did you feel like you were preserving a disappearing world, or a world that was about to disappear?
I was 22, I was just trying to get through the day. No, I had no idea. I did, because it was 1975, it wasn't a disappearing world for me then, it was what it was. I just thought they were characters that you don't really see, but I would see. Or I saw them through my uncle.
On the back left.
John, talking about your uncle, that scene of the kitchen table with all the high neck bottles, I've seen that before in my family, I can assure you.
Yeah. My father was a panel beater, and I would go up to the panel shop quite often, and they would often close the panel shop and do nothing but drink. And so I saw a lot of beer bottles growing up. My two uncles, my father's actually in the film. He's one of the guys at the bar, and my uncle was the Uncle Tom who ran a fish stall, and he said to me, because all they did was drink for 3 days, he said, "You know, John, if this is what film acting is, I'm a natural."
Yes. Yep.
Just a quick question for people who collect physical media. Like, where could I watch this again?
You know, I actually think it's posted. I didn't even know. I think it's posted on YouTube.
Wow.
But by the VCA.
The VCA put it there.
Yeah.
It's not as good a copy as the one we saw. It's a bit magenta, but it is on YouTube. Yes.
I was interested in the scene where Doug speaks to Marge, and there's another conversation with the other two characters behind them. And what was your reaction?
actually the dialogue in
What were you
I was trying
to achieve?
I suppose there were two stories going on, but because I didn't have headphones or anything, I didn't realise that the dialogue in the foreground was quite as loud as it was, and I didn't want it to be that loud. But when at the end of the day I heard it, it was locked into the film.
Yes.
I wanted it to be lower because that was not supposed to be intentionally as distracting as that. It's like the birds at the end of the film, and the birds keep getting higher and higher. It was before rock and roll mixing, you couldn't stop and start, you had to go all the way through. So if you made a mistake, you could either live with the mistake or start again. I was working at the miners camera department. I had to ask the boss for 3 hours off to mix the film. And when I got down to VFL, Wally Shaw, who was watching the Sporting Globe, said, "We can have a half run through of this, Johnny, and then we'll have just one go at it." And so when we got to that point, Wally was looking at I think he's dead now, so I can say the truth. He was looking at the Sporting Globe, and his arm hit one of the faders, and the birds came up. And I kept saying, "Wally, pull the birds down, because the birds are the same birds, and they get louder, and they travel to where Marge is, and they haven't changed pitch." But you just have to live with that.
That was very postmodern.
I will say the importance you put on sound, though, really does stand out through the whole film.
Yeah.
Yes?
I was just wondering that the title of the film is a reference to the destination and not the location of the film.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned that the Queensland tourism kind of got a bit antsy when it played on the ABC, but I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about this kind of directionless that the characters are in, and then the film title kind of refers to from sort of the screenwriting perspective.
Well, I think I don't know if I'm making this up, but when was Midnight Cowboy made?
69.
Yeah, because I remember seeing that. Remember, and that was the same thing. They had a goal of going down to Florida, where the good times and the weather were, and I think I must have remembered that, and that's why the north of Queensland. And they used to run heavily those ads all the time on the radio, and they always seemed to run them heavily when it was winter down here. And we shot the film during winter, so it was cold.
I think in fact, I can remember in the 80s that for a lot of people Queensland was still the goal. That there was still a lot of people thinking that's the place to go, that's better weather, better lifestyle, better everything. But it changed, obviously, quite quickly.
Well, I remember my mother took me to Surfers Paradise when I was 12, and I couldn't get over it. It was called Paradise.
Maggie?
I was in Bendigo today, and there's an Australiana exhibition at the gallery there at the moment. And one of the exhibits is Rennie Ellis's photographs from that time. And do you remember, they were pretty much the same sort of scenes, people in pubs and passed out at footy matches, all that kind of stuff. But it really, I just saw stuff today that's very much, it suggested anyone go and see it. It's quite an interesting exhibition. I really love the editing, John. Can you talk about the editing a bit?
Okay, well, Mark Norfolk, that was the first film he'd cut. Yeah. Mark went on to cut commercials in Singapore, beer commercials, and I don't think he did another drama again. And I noticed on the crew, Peter Gawler, who was the first AD, he went on to write and produce Underbelly, all the series. So, and Adrian Bickersgill, who came up with the costumes and got us the locations and knocked on the door and asked people we could plug the PowerPoint, use our lights in their house when they walked the dog down the street. Excuse me, can we use your PowerPoint? He's done production manager on a lot of productions. So, yeah, I don't know.
A great team.
Yeah, and I don't know how it got made. I just had no expectations of it whatsoever. And when it was finished at the end of the year, Brian told me I'd failed the course because I hadn't mixed the film. But Phil and Adams liked it a lot, and Fred Skepsey liked it a lot, and actually said to me, "You've taken a lot of people who were extras and you've actually got a performance out of them." And I was telling somebody today about the character plays Bill, who they get the car from. I can't remember his actor's name, I think it was Fred. He was at Cryle Castle. He used to fall off a horse all the time. And he kept saying to me, John, why don't you get someone to hit me because I can take a fall? Why don't you get Doug at the end when they get the keys to have a fight? He can hit me and I'll fall down because I can do that really well. And I said, no, there's no time, Bill. I've only got 600 feet of film to shoot. I haven't got time for a fight.
Yeah, on the far right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, you had a question? Yes, yes, sorry.
Sorry. The credits at the end say that you and I think Ellery still own the copyright. So are you in a position to make it available through some other channel or put a better digital copy on YouTube or?
That's a good question. You know, I don't know really who owns the copyright because the film was made at Swinburne at the time.
Yeah.
And
always demanding world rights, yes. Yeah.
So it's a fuzzy area, and because the film's never really, except for one sale, made any money. And actually, I know the banjo music we never got the copyright for. It was such an obscure recording from America on such a small label. We took a chance, but then we never thought the film was ever going to be released in any way. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
With the locations, I just loved how you photographed Northcote predominantly, I think.
It was all Northcote, yeah.
Cinematographer Ellery Ruane, is it? How did these locations come about? Did you have Northcote specifically in mind when you were writing the script?
No, more like Collingwood, because Ellery was living in Collingwood, but Collingwood was a bit too busy with the traffic. And so when we just drove around, Northcote seemed an ideal place. It was Northcote and Collingwood and Coburg. When they walked around the rubbish tip and where all those big factories are, that was Coburg, and the chocolate factory was in, was the James's chocolate factory. It used to be in, is it Hoddle Street in Collingwood? And I think the house the boarding house was in Gore Street, Fitzroy, but everything else was Northcote.
Where was the KFC?
KFC was in East Hawthorn, or Hawthorn. I don't know why. Oh, because Swinburne was there. Yeah.
No, can I just let people know, it's on the VCA Film and TV School Digital Archive.
Oh.
You set up a login. They've digitised just about the whole collection. You set up a login and just type in Queensland. I've just checked it and it's there. So, yeah. So you should be able to. And it's
I'm a collector of old media.
Yes.
I have heaps and heaps and heaps of very rare DVDs. He said, can we get a DVD?
I asked a copy of. I asked a copy myself. Could I get a copy on DVD of it from Ray Argall, who did the mastering? No, it's never been put out on DVD. It came out. I think there were 78 copies came out on VHS, and that was it. Really, you'd have to kind of work out how you could copy it.
Do a conversion.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yes.
John, shooting at Olympic Park Dogs, that looked like a completely different section of film to everything else. Did you basically sneak in there at night or something?
Well, we just went with the camera and shot the Greyhound races. We just took the camera there. The actual crowd scene is the old Hawthorn football ground, where we had some student people and relations, the whole crowd scene of 10 people standing in front of one of the stands at the old Hawthorn football ground, and then just intercut it with the real Greyhounds.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Jamie.
Yes.
That just kind of, what he was asking, I noticed in some of the scenes where they're walking at night and talking, your lighting was very dim, and then occasionally they kind of hit a light. So were you literally setting up those lights so you could kind of see the actors, or was that actual street lighting in the evenings when you were shooting?
No, that was a very limited amount of lighting that Ori had, and so yeah, they would walk into shadow and then hit another part of light, because we had no generator truck, and as I said, it was about 4 or 5 lights. So he did a pretty good job, really, with the few lights that he had.
Yeah.
I have a question for John Flaus. Sorry. With you also being like a film critic and somebody who knows so much about film, was it hard for you with this film or with other films to kind of switch off the critic part of your mind and think and just be an actor?
Well, no. I have to say, I have occasionally questioned myself about this. Why have I stopped being a critic? Once I'm in this situation where creation is going on and I am part of the creative process, why can't I be a critic anymore? I don't know why. And I don't know, in the case of other people who now practice criticism but were, prior to that, professionals in a production, could they be both at once? But I really, in most cases, could not. It was only on those rare times when a special effect was being set up and there was long preparation for it and so forth. Yes, I could think then sometimes about what's this going to look like, but what will be around it. That's why it's so difficult to be a critic while you're working. If at least if you're an actor, I don't know. If I'd been on a camera crew, that may have been different. But I'm sorry, I can't say.
Are there any more questions? No?
What was Brian Robinson's attitude to the finished film?
That's a good question.
He never expressed whether he liked it or disliked it, but told me I'd failed the course because I hadn't mixed the film. So I said, well, how could that be? I made a 50-minute film and I've failed. How does that work? Anyway, we had an argument of yelling, and then he said, you can have 50. I thought, okay, that's fine, I just need to pass. But when I was working at Myers, I remember, as I said, I got 3 hours off to go and mix the film. Just, yeah.
What was your budget?
The budget was $12,000, I think. We got $8,000 from the Experimental Film Fund, and Chris and I put the other money in. Yeah.
Can I ask a general question to both Johns? For both of you, this was like a first kind of film. It's like 50 years ago, and how do you both feel about your careers overall? And, when you were, that age, I know, John, you were older, you weren't in your 20s when you made this film.
No, I was 40.
You were about 40, but it was your first major acting role as acting a character. At the time, how did you both feel like, the trajectory of your career would go? And, I don't know, just any kind of philosophical, personal kind of thoughts about working in cinema and what it is and what it's meant for you.
Well, I had no expectations. I thought I could get a job at Crawford's because I did this film. But when I approached Crawford's, they were interested in seeing the film. And when I approached the ABC, could I show you my film and I get a job as an assistant director, they said, we've got all our trainee directors, we don't need to see the film. So I actually kind of thought, well, that's probably the end of the career. I went to work in the camera department at Myers, and then I know Fred Skepsey offered me, he gave Ellery a job on that film as a camera assistant. He offered me a job being an assistant editor, but I failed the editing part of the course at Swinburne because I couldn't keep things in sync. So I thought, I'm not going to work there with Fred yelling and screaming at me. So I just went to work as an industrial cameraman, shooting industrial documentaries. And really, then I went to work at Rusden. So now 10 years had passed and I was working at Rusden, and one of the members of staff there said, John, there's an ad in the Age, wanted for the Australian Film Theatre, unemployed people to train as crew members. And she said, you're always complaining, why don't you go and apply for that? So I took my old film Queensland down, so it's now 85, I haven't done it for 10 years. And so I directed this Tonally movie. It was written by, called Hanging Together, it was written by Gordon Graham, who wrote The Boys, the movie. It's never been screened. And but because of that, Tim and Ken gave me the Raymond Carver short story to adapt called Feathers. So I did this 50-minute film. So that was really, the next real film I directed was 11 years after the first film.
Jeez. And then there was Death in Brunswick.
Oh yeah, then I did
classic.
I did Death in Brunswick, and that was okay. It would have was unfortunate. The IRA did a bombing campaign when the film came on in London, and then after Death in Brunswick, I was offered a film which has become like the albatross around my neck, the Tim Winton thing called That Eye of the Sky, which was kind of. I remember Pierre Brisson, who we all had to gather at the cinema, and he would say if your film was going to get it in Cannes or not, and he'd actually put feathers in Cannes for us and liked it. So he said to me later, you're a stupid boy, you should have given me Death in Brunswick, I would have given you a midnight screening. But the Overseas Film Group, who partly financed it, put it on the London Film Festival to get a quick sale to the BBC, so we couldn't screen it, it didn't get into Cannes. And when he saw That Eye of the Sky, he said, oh, the film is murd. And Peter Bilby, who was the producer, said, yeah, I know it's a muddy print. No, he said, no, murd, shit, your film is shit. And so that was a pretty hard experience, that film, because Death in Brunswick was a popular film, and that film was completely unpopular. And then a few years later, I suppose I did some commercials, and then I did Dead Letter Office, which was a good and bad experience. And I did a telly movie for Channel 10, which was a good and bad experience. And then I haven't done anything since the year 2000. I just stopped. I wrote a few more things, they never happened. It's just, that's the business of the film business, I suppose.
Have you got any desire now, at the age of 70, I think you are, to do something maybe really low budget? Like, look,
someone said to me, here's a project and it's actually financed. And I read it, I'd give it a go. But the reality is that doesn't happen unless you kind of get the project off the ground yourself, and that's going to take 5 years, and then they fall over and they don't happen. I just got sick of hitting my head against the wall. I did my 3 days in Hollywood, and I got offered a film, and I said to the guy, who are we going to get to shoot this film? And he said, oh, don't worry, there'll be 1,000 guys will break their neck to want to shoot this. And I said, oh, if that's the case, it's supposed to be 10,000 who want to break their neck to direct it. And he said, yeah. And I said, oh, I don't think I want to do it then. But I didn't want to be in America. I just wanted to do films here.
John Flaus, how do you look back at all your career and the fact that you were a critic as well for Film Buff's Forecast, and it's like a double life within the cinema world?
Well, being a critic, and I do also make a distinction here between a reviewer and a critic. To me, a reviewer is someone who writes about a film for a readership who haven't seen it, and a critic writes about a film for a readership that have seen it. And of course, most critics also do reviews, and a lot of reviewers also do critic work too from time to time. I enjoyed doing that, and I felt that I did it well. so far as acting was concerned, or any other sort of work in film production, I really had no confidence in myself. I knew there was something I could do, but whether there was a need for it, whether there was anybody in production locally who needed what I could do, was not likely, given the films that were being made and some television productions even at that time. So being a critic, which did not pay well and so forth, at least I could, what's the word, I had an income sufficient to live a very, very modest life. And that was the stability of my working life. To be an actor was to take a chance every time, really. And there were the plays I've done about, let me see, close to 50 theatre productions were really live performances, but many of those were not on anyone's payroll. So if I was going to work as an actor, it would have to be on camera. And I did get roles here and there that helped me for that, but I never knew when the next one was coming. I never had confidence in myself. In virtually any role I played, could be someone out there who would do this better than me. However, I'm going to get in trouble now. Writing film criticism, I couldn't imagine in most cases that there was anyone who was going to write anything better than what I had to say. I know that does, as I say, I knew that would bring laughter. But that's the truth of it, that my criticism was on many occasions just touching upon something that had not been looked at or appreciated previously. And that's what I had to do to serve the film culture. That's what I had to do, was that, rather than to act in films. Because there'd be other blokes around who could do better than me.
If you had to choose between those two lives, as Bill put it, could you?
Oh, if I had to choose between them, I would have to be a critic, yes.
Okay.
I think I might enjoy my life more if I continued to get roles in things, yeah. But no, the work I've done, it seems to me, it's more useful to other people in film culture, what I've written, more than what I've performed.
Yes.
Just going back to Death in Brunswick for a moment, I used to work in publishing, and in the 1980s one day a phone call came. Hello Teresa, my name's Boyd Oxlade. I think you know my sister. And I said, oh yeah, I think I do know your sister. And he said, well, I've got this thing that I've written, can I bring it to you? So he came in with this manuscript that he'd already showed to about 4 other publishers, and they'd all told him to go away. And I read it, and I just loved it so much, and I published it. Yeah, and hence Death in Brunswick is my favourite film.
Oh, wow, there you go. Wow. I remember Boyd told me that maybe it was when Penguin picked it up with the...
No, it was Heinemann.
Heinemann. That he got a phone call that they were going to pulp the novel, or copies of it, and did he want to buy some? And he rang up, and they were the man who was going to do the pulping. And Boyd said, "Don't do it. It's going to be a major motion picture." And he said, "That's what they all say, mate."
Oh my God.
Yeah.
We'll wrap it up, Joe.
Yep.
I think we have to wrap it up right now. So I would love you to thank both Johns who have been wonderful.